many business entities have unions. There's definitely a lot of pros and cons about unions, but more importantly, they are put in place to protect the people, the employees, or even the players. Before 1967, there was no Players Association within the NHL. The NHLPA, or the National Hockey League Players Association, was first formed in 1967 and was led by Allan Eagelson. Eagelson led the National Hockey League Players Association up until 1991, where ironically he was forced to leave this position because of trust issues with the players. And then funny enough, years later he was charged for embezzlement and corruption and was even given a $1 million fine. A lot of his crimes are actually tied to the National Hockey League owners, which makes you think, was he really on the player's side? On January 1st, 1992, Allan Eagelson was then succeeded by Bob Goodenow. And in 1992, Goodenow was tasked with negotiating the new CBA, or I guess the Collective Bargaining Agreement. To sum it up simply, the CBA is basically a contract that lays out all the fundamental details on how a team can structure their individual player contracts and how they can do their negotiations. And some examples include player minimum salaries, escrow, and even the offer sheet system. And in 1992, CBA talks were going to be different this time around under Goodenow, since for one, he wasn't corrupt, and two, he was not going to go easy on the ownership. On April 1st, 1992, the NHLPA rejected the owner's last offer by a vote of 560 to 4. However, the players in Goodenow were smart. They strategically timed the strike to occur heading into the 1992 Stanley Cup playoffs, a time in which teams and owners are the most profitable. And on a side note, lots of the NHL ownership group had the audacity to spin this whole situation to make it seem like the players just didn't respect the fans, and that's why there was not going to be playoff hockey in 1992. On April 7th, they rejected another offer and the Players Association would not budge on their side. April 10th, the owners finally caved in and proposed a deal that was actually fair to both sides, so that they would play the remainder of the season and then go into the playoffs. So why did the 1992 strike actually occur? Well, it occurred because there are some big issues with free agency, the arbitration process, playoff bonuses, and individual player pensions. When Eagelson was in control of the NHLPA, he wouldn't gain traction on forwarding the players' value. So when Goodenow came in with fire, ownership was basically really salty and they just didn't really want to give in to the players. Lockouts, or in this scenario strikes, can really occur from both sides of the negotiation. Whether it's the players who are unhappy or perhaps it's even the owners, but let's be honest here, most of the time issues really stem from the players and not the very wealthy owners. There are many sides and many variables when a strike occurs. There's the players who may be upset with their compensation, there's the owners who run the business side and have to generate revenue to pay the players, there's the individual team management, who of course is tasked with the job of negotiating all of the player contracts, and then of course there's the fans whose passion makes the whole wheel turn. There has now been one strike and 3 lockouts in the history of the NHL. The first strike occurred in 1992 because of free agency, pension, and all the other things I mentioned. In 1994 and 1995, there was a lockout that occurred for over 3 months. However, from the owner's side, Gary Bettman was finally in play, which of course caused a whole tradition of hating Mr. Gary Bettman. Back in 1995, the topic of salary cap was a big issue. In many other sports, there's a thing called a luxury tax, in which a team can go above the salary cap, but they have to pay a larger fee. And for bigger markets like the Toronto Maple Leafs, this is not an issue at all. But for smaller markets, this luxury tax would be a huge downfall in terms of their team's success, I guess in terms of just like a level playing field within the NHL. There's a reason why teams like the Detroit Red Wings could build just an all-star team and win so many Stanley Cups because they could just afford to do so. Fast forward to 2004. Gary Bettman announces an NHL lockout that lasted over 10 whole months. The issue stemmed from Gary Bettman proposing a new deal that linked player salaries directly to the revenue that the teams generated. This was just one proposal that was quickly turned away. From a first glance, this may not seem too bad. However, this proposal took away a lot of the financial security from the players. The interesting thing is that the salary cap is definitely a normal thing in 2019, but in the early 2000s, it was something that basically every single player was against. It meant that bigger markets could not splurge, which meant that they would lose potential contract money. So even though many view it as a way to level out the NHL playing field, the owners viewed it as a set amount of money in which they'd have to spend, which also provides more security for them, because believe it or not, in the early 2000s, 7 teams were losing money every season, and multiple teams even declare bankruptcy. There's definitely a lot of salary cap disparity in sports. Some teams can spend double the cap, and then some other teams refuse to even come close to the cap until their fans revolt. Fast forward to 2012. The NHL in the 2012-2013 season only saw 48 games played. Well, I mean, I personally remember this season myself. I was very devastated, but at least some amount of hockey was actually played. And this whole season was just really weird because we saw so many players playing in so many different leagues around the world, whether it even was the AHL, the SHL, the KHL, or even Swiss leagues. The 2012-2013 lockout was caused by many underlying issues, mostly to do with changing various components of player contracts, and some examples were changing entry-level contracts from 3 to 5 years, reducing player revenue, and extending free agency contract terms from 7 to 10 years. And all of these terms, of course, heavily favored the owners. On January 6, 2013, after 16 continuous hours of negotiations, the owners and players finally agreed on a deal, which of course, like I mentioned previously, allowed them to play 48 games instead of 82, and then obviously to continue the playoffs. Some of the main points of interest included a $44 million salary cap floor, a $60 million salary cap, the ability to sign 8-year contract extensions on existing contracts, and for free agency, the ability to go up to 7 years total, and mandatory arbitration acceptance if the dollar amount is under $3.5 million. Fast forward to 2019. We are seeing a lot of very just outrageous contracts that are honestly just confusing. Kevin Hayes, Bobrovsky, Anders Lee, Panarin, Brandon Tanev, and I'm not saying any of these players do not deserve the amount of money that they got paid, but compared to previous seasons, they are just really getting paid. Players and their agents are really just starting to, I guess, find ways to abuse our current system. And of course, that is just kind of what's going to happen over time. Once we get used to the system, people find loopholes. A big example of this is kind of the way that they structure their contracts. For example, player bonuses, because they are lockout proof. So for example, like Austin Matthews, if the NHL were to lock out, he's still going to have a big payday regardless of if he plays or not. And of course, that is completely in his right. And if that's what ownership wants to do, that is fine. But for smaller market teams, again, this is kind of a way that they're at a disadvantage. But for the most part, we are just seeing so many players to sign big contracts that do not necessarily equate to their actual value that they bring to their team. There's recently been a lot of talk comparing NHL salaries to other sports, I guess around North America. Not only that, but directly comparing player salaries from even 10-20 years ago until now. And as a result, it is definitely very frustrating from a player's viewpoint. Leagues like the NBA, MLB, and even the NFL are just completely blowing away the numbers you see in the NHL. So even though it really seems like NHL players these days are getting paid, compared to a league like the NBA, it's not even close. And just as recently, it really seems like players are wanting to get paid, which is completely in their right and is completely fine to do. However, in the past couple seasons, it definitely seems like everything's just been getting fast forwarded greatly, which makes analysts and us hockey fans very worried about another lockout. It is good to keep in mind that absolutely nobody benefits from a lockout. Owners don't benefit, players don't benefit, us fans don't benefit. No one really benefits. We are coming into an era where lockouts in sports are just not as common, especially because the previous lockouts set such a precedent that pushed away everyone from ever going into a lockout situation again. The CBA has an optional opt-out clause starting this season, which actually was just rejected by the owners and Gary Bettman, which for the most part is good. and the CBA officially expires in the 21-22 season. And it really does seem like, because of recent trends, that we're heading towards some type of lockout. Will we see it again? Well, I mean, the NHL as of recently has been seeing really good consistent growth. And currently the NHL is just in a completely different situation that we were in the previous 3 lockouts. We're seeing like the Arizona Coyotes have the most successful season yet in terms of ticket sales. And we're even seeing 2 new franchises being added within a 5-year period, which hasn't happened in decades. There's a lot of positives surrounding the whole game of hockey right now. So let's pray that this is enough to leverage a new deal without creating some type of lockout in the future. But anyways guys, thank you guys so much for watching. This is completely different, I guess, format than I've ever done before. It's kind of like a mini documentary series, well, a mini documentary episode, and I plan on doing more of these in the future, so I really hope you guys enjoy. And one thing I should definitely mention is within this video, I mentioned a lot of details, but I did not mention every detail. So if you kind of think, whoa, you didn't mention this, I probably didn't mention a lot, because if I were to do a full documentary on every single lockout, it would be like hours long. But rather, I just tried to highlight some of the main focal points, so sorry if I skipped over something you feel is important. And again guys, I really enjoy making these types of videos, so I really hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm kind of in a weird limbo with my content as of recently. I want to keep up with the current event stuff, Canucks coverage, hockey coverage just in general, but I do want to start making more of these, I guess, mini documentary series like this one. Not only that though, NHL 20 is coming out, and I really do want to do a franchise mode where I can interact with you guys and we can build NHL teams together. But anyways guys, thank you guys so much for watching. I really do hope you guys enjoyed this different type of video. I appreciate you guys' support so much. Thank you guys for watching. See you guys later.